I had a super early flight. The after party went to 3 a.m. I did not attend it.
Oh, I was going to say, did you just go and stay awake then all night?
Yeah, I think some people did. Not, I don't. A lot of people had early flights, and a lot of
Yeah.
people went to the party. So there was a after party for everyone, and then there was a after party for Clio folks that went. So, I mean, it looked like great fun. Uh, I had a full day on Wednesday and a flight at 6 a.m., which means that 4:30 I arrived at the airport, so I wasn't going to take the shuttle from downtown Nashville to
Right.
the airport. So,
Did you get good barbecue? Are you a fan of barbecue?
yeah, it's funny. I'm not a huge fan of barbecue, nor
Oh,
am I
okay.
a huge fan of country music, so it wasn't really my vibe. But um, and in the venue was in it was in Nashville, but 10 miles outside of the downtown area. So
Oh,
it
okay.
was right next to the Grand Ole Opry, but that location is far away from. Yeah, if you read Bob Ambrosie's, I think that was kind of the consensus. Bob Ambrosie did a little write up on the conference.
Oh, yeah, I missed it. Yeah.
It's still the number one legal conference, but really dinged the team for the venue choice.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Well, yeah,
yeah,
because you're here in Nashville and you think you'll be right down
yeah.
in the thick of things. Yeah.
I mean, and it was the Gaylord Hilton gigantic complex. It was just, I
Oh,
mean, I got
really?
lost every,
Uh,
it was the kind of play he compared it to an Escher
uh-huh.
drawing, with the upside down
Oh,
stairs
yeah.
and everything.
Yep. Yep.
Every time I left my room, my hotel room, I'm like, what? Wait a minute, which direction do I go? It was that kind of madness, And I never got my bearings, not once while I was there. It was
Yeah. I had a similar experience years ago. I went to a distance learning conference at the Disney resort in Orlando. And like I took a water taxi to get from the
oh,
hotel I was staying in to where the conference was. And I was forever getting on some random boat and ending up, and everywhere they're piping, it's a small world out of like bushes. And I was like, this is the most surreal kind of conference. It was crazy. But I had the same thought, like, I'm coming at it from a different angle, but I think it's the right place.
yeah. Yeah, it was really discombobulating. I thought the programming was great. I
Yeah.
did. I do work for Clio, right? So I'm on the inside, but I had a great time, and I enjoyed the keynotes. And
Were you on any programs, Mike?
I was giving a lot of demos of LawYaw, so I did a ton of that. Did some building of documents for new customers, and
So you spent a lot of time in the exhibit hall, or
I
is that
did,
where you
yeah,
would? Yeah.
a lot of time in the exhibit hall. The exhibit hall was nice. That was, and Ambrosi said that as well. I mean, I had good conversations with other vendors there, and it was a very usable space. I thought I felt like I had a lot of good conversations there. It wasn't.
Oh, that's good.
That was pretty well organized, I thought. Yeah.
Well, and some of those exhibit hall spaces are so cavernous that you go to talk to someone and it echoes and your voices are
Yeah.
lost in that huge space. So there's
Yeah.
something to be said for the space itself.
Yeah, there were a couple of stages there, which I think is a good idea. They did the launch code competition from there. They did there were a lot of product pitches there, which I think is a lovely idea for. I attended a few of those for the vendors, to really, to be on stage for a little while. I think
Yeah.
it's a lovely idea for
Yeah.
vendors. But that it was a little hard to hear unless you were right in
Yeah.
the front row. It
Yeah.
was pretty loud, but yeah,
Yeah. Hmm.
it's a good time. It's a good time. I heard Neil Kochal speak. We
Yeah.
talked
How was
about
he? He
him.
talked about the Supreme Court, right?
Yeah, he
I
did.
did see a summary of his talk on one of those blogs.
Yeah,
Might have been
yeah.
Ambrosi.
It was
Yeah.
engaging, plain spoken, surprisingly apolitical.
Hmm.
Considering it was just kind of an interesting talk.
Yeah.
Kind of nice. It was engaging. Well, not life changing. It was
Right.
the Brian Stevenson type keynote
Right.
where mind blown kind of thing, and wasn't that, but it
Right.
was still totally engaging and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we will formally get started in 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Yeah.
I'll give you. I know we shared some of this earlier, but I've got Butterick's practical typography up here. A couple of trademark searches.
Oh, right. For your trademark question. Yep.
Yeah, and then I've got a separate tab open here for some of the plain English
Yep.
resources.
Yeah.
Got the Act. I did not bring up the Minnesota Act. I should have done that. Maybe we can
Yeah.
do.
Well, there was that Minnesota executive order.
Oh, it was
And
an
there's
executive
also
order.
legislation, I think. I just think it's interesting. There's nothing wrong with trying to legislate plain English, but how do you make people do it?
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. To kind of see how this was organized.
And do you have that SEC document?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Which
still one of
just
my
cracks me up
favorites.
because I'm just like, there's no way to make SEC documents comprehensible.
Oh, I
I
know.
don't care how plain your English is.
Yeah, yeah. And I think these disclosures are intentionally hard to find quite often.
And then hard to understand once you find
Yeah.
them.
This is like a 1998 document too. That's still
Yeah.
widely shared. Still a good document.
Yeah.
I'll probably get this better organized in the show notes, but
Yeah.
the operating,
Yep.
you were saying how they made, how do you get people to do it?
Right.
As interagency organization.
Yep. It's
Oh,
interesting, once you're in a field and you start speaking the jargon, I think you don't even recognize when you're not using clear language. It's a legit challenge. There's someone in the county here in Hennepin, I think, whose job is to promote and revise documents to make them easier for people to understand. Yeah.
I'm going to struggle a little bit to explain this language, but maybe you can correct me if you know. But we should get started.
I suppose. Well,
yeah, 8 o'clock. And we have a busy day ahead of us outside of our little fan service here. So we should get rolling. I'm Mike Carlson. I'm a researcher with Gray Paper Legal.
I'm Karen Westwood, director of the Hennepin County Law Library.
We're here to answer the question today. What was the most interesting legal research question of the week? And we have kind of a couple of related ones this afternoon, this morning. Wow.
Yeah, totally but by afternoon, you mean morning, right?
Early morning.
Speaking of clear language.
Yeah. What is we were reminded that it was International Plain Language Day yesterday, October 13th, which I wasn't aware of as a thing, and I was completely unfamiliar with the act that created that, and sort of how to do any kind of research or find out what the principles are for these agency rules. So that was kind of an interesting one. Did you have a chance to take a look at this at all, Karen?
I didn't look at the act at all, Mike. Of course, as I confessed to you, I got distracted by wondering if that was similar to International Talk Like a Pirate Day.
Yeah,
which was a little bit.
Are they on the same day?
No, they're not. That comes in September, but
Okay.
it's a little kind of tongue-in-cheek, sort of made-up day to mock things like International Plain Language Day. But I do think it was all part of trying to make government more transparent, right? So when we speak in code and use our jargon and make information of the public available to the public, it isn't meaningful information if people can't understand it. So, I laud the attempt. I'm not sure how well it can be enforced.
Right. I mean, and as you were just saying, so often once you're on the inside of something, and you can imagine that that the policy wonks inside of federal agencies are definitely on the inside and sharing acronyms, and so I do love the attempt here as well, just to say that we need to be speaking to the general public, and that's what the law seems to cover. What it says, it directs the agency to adopt guidelines for writing in plain English. And the concept of plain English is what we're talking about, writing for essentially an 8th grade reading level, I think, correct? Is that your understanding?
Yeah, no, I didn't look up the specific level, but definitely like middle school, high school, you're trying to really distill the essence, which, as someone who loves vocabulary, like I love lots of big words, but when it comes down to it, you should be able to read what affects you as a citizen and understand what it means. So I think that's what it's driving at.
And it's interesting, some of the guidelines here as well. Some of them we're just as former English majors probably familiar with. Avoid using passive voice and things like that. But there are a lot of other interesting things here too. Things like sometimes it's appropriate to use contractions. This document, and again, we'll update the items in the show notes, but the federal plain language guidelines were promulgated by this intergovernment group, and they've been charged with drafting these guidelines, and they're available on the internet. And I'll make sure that I share the link from the Plain Language Action and Information Network, folks who have more to do than just their day job, but contribute to resources like this. So that's super interesting. But yeah, things like using contractions, to write like you speak is often a good approach for writing in plain English, which I'm sure lawyers might object to in certain respects. But yeah, very, very interesting. This is a very great resource. I loved browsing through this. Just a big PDF, and I'll share that in our show notes. Not gigantic, just 118 pages long, and you can just do a Control F, right? I mean, to look things, but it's well organized and it's well written, right?
Yeah. Which one would hope?
So really cool resource. The other resource you and I were just talking about was the Plain English Handbook. This one's quite old, from 1998. This was a Plain English guide drafted by the Securities and Exchange Commission well before the enactment of the Plain English law. And this obviously was drafted by the SEC saying, we want to make our disclosures readable. Like the whole point of having public disclosures is to give investors good information. And I thought this was a really great resource. This was actually introduced to me in law school.
Really?
Yeah. How did you come across this one? Because you mentioned this even before we started this morning.
Yeah, I used to do securities in my brief life as a private attorney. I was in the securities practice group, And so I would work on these disclosures and the 8Ks and 10Ks, and they were just incomprehensible. And then to the degree they were comprehensible, a lot of them, right, they have to follow that format. So one just started to look like another. And you would go through those like risk factors and change one word in a paragraph. And it was kind of mind numbing. But I really got hammered into me to stop using the passive voice. This is something that
Oh, really?
we tend to refine, apparently, in
No
law
kidding.
school, or I did.
Who is doing that to you? Or for you, I
One of
should
the
say.
partners, would
Really?
say, why did you write it this way? Make it
Yeah.
active. I'm like, I don't know. The whole thing seems so passive to me.
Was the partner, did the partner introduce you to this document, or was this just
It
part of
must
the
have been.
environment?
I think it must have been
Yeah.
the partner who was like, here, take a look at this, Yeah.
And one of the things that I like to highlight in this document just are the visuals or the graphics, use of graphics, which is super interesting. They talk about giving enough white space around the document.
Yeah.
Avoid using fancier graphics. These doesn't really offer any easy
Right.
way to read the data, right? This one I reference quite a bit. This you can tell is just deceptive, right? The using a non-zero baseline.
Oh,
Here
yeah.
is 25. So here it looks like a 50% increase from Q3 to Q4, when really if you use a zero baseline, it's not. So it really oversells it. You're just looking at a portion of this chart, and so some ethical use of visualizations represented in this document, I thought was kind of an interesting.
Yeah, and definitely they want to hit on that because, when you're doing those disclosure documents, you're trying to make your company, your client look good, but still comply with the truthfulness of the document. So you're threading a needle there linguistically in a lot of ways.
I love that resource. And then it was the Plain Writing Act of 2010, Public Law 111-274. Going back, the other, this is just a resource that I love, as well as Adams on Contract Drafting. I did a search here for plain language or plain English. It's interesting. Some writing. Ken Adams. Have you ever used this blog at all?
I haven't. I'll have to take a look at it.
I use Ken Adams is his work is all about making contracts secure, understandable, readable, and plain spoken. So I did a quick couple of searches just for plain English here, and here's some good results from Ken Adams. It's interesting. One of these he said he likes to call it, because attorneys do tend to turn back on the idea of plain English. And as you say, those disclosures are necessarily complicated. He calls it something else. I think he called it not plain English. I think he called it standard English was what he called
sure.
it. But my research tip here is I use this for contract drafting all the time, because he does good writing just about what makes sense in terms of I always go to the notice provision, because just technically I forget what are the concerns with a notice provision that includes email, and when is it considered sent, and he's got good advice on how to draft that kind of language. So I just simple keyword search here, notice. And so there are a couple of provisions here that when I'm trying to remember how I like to draft that, or I'm actually thinking about how Ken Adams to do it. Yeah. So
I would always have to look up indemnification. Those every provision for that, I have to go back and think it through again. When I first got into law librarianship after law school, I was surprised at how many sources libraries have for contract clauses, like sample clauses.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, before I went to law school, I didn't really understand the utility of that. But to your point, often you have like the bulk of your contract, you think it's great, but there are a couple of pieces you're just not sure about. You don't really want to read a ton of contracts to try to figure it out. But if you have some, a set of sample clauses, and now, of course, you find those on Westlaw and Lexis, and also sets of those, but I wasn't aware of this blog as a way to get at those.
What are there some common titles you like to refer people
to? I just feel like, well, I know there's a Wolters Kluwer title on construction contract clauses, because they have some good construction material, and there are these AIA standards and other standards that are and like model contracts and clauses, and so that's a great source for that. Yeah, super particular.
And that's not something you get from Westlaw either. I remember people
right or Lexis. That's its own animal.
Yeah.
Wolters Kluwer. So yeah.
I do use this Law Insider from time to time. This is one of those resources, speaking of the SEC, that pulls from those, I always forget, is it the Exhibit 23? You probably know better than I do, but the material.
I can't remember the exhibit numbers, but yeah, where you get the attachments.
The material contracts, yeah. And these are great. They're all coded by contract type, and quick, simple search gives good samples which you can copy.
And is that a paid subscription, Mike, or this is just out on the internet, Law Insider?
It is out there on the internet. You do get they do have a paid for option, which I think strips out I think it gives you some deeper search functionality.
Probably
about that. I do have a subscription.
Oh yeah.
Not outrageous, and no advertising.
Yes, which is really nice.
I use this, but these are not necessarily, what I typically use these for is not to find the plain English stuff. For that, I really do like Ken Adams, but I don't necessarily remember what the legal concerns are. So this is a good place to actually find the substantive content, I think,
right,
or at least what people are thinking about, and then I'll bounce back to Ken Adams and say, well, is that even necessary? right. And oftentimes Ken Adams will say that's duplicative or unnecessary. And so I don't know if that's an effective research strategy, is to begin with an indemnification clause that looks like this and then begin to pare it down. But
I know. And the risk with searching SEC filings, of course you always get examples of documents, but I always wonder at the back of my head, but is it a good one? Anybody can file, right? And maybe you're coming from a firm that has a really big, wordy, kind of overblown style of writing. So you just have to be use some discretion as a researcher in what you decide to rely on.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the research strategies for finding, do you have your favorite authors?
Right. Well, some people do that, right? In practice, if you're a securities firm and you really respect certain other securities lawyers or firms, often on these search engines, then there's a way to pull up the name of the firm or the author. Maybe not on this one.
Just a keyword. Who should we do?
Yeah, now I don't know. Like who does security?
I'll put that in the show notes. Yeah.
And of course, in your own firm, you use your own knowledge management database and pull up, the partner who you think writes an elegant 10Q.
And there are plenty of, if you are in a bigger firm, there are services that allow you to save your clauses, and there's just simple word functionality that allow you to do that as well. But sometimes getting it to plain English is a lot of work.
It is. Yeah, for sure.
So that's plain English. That was kind of an interesting event today. I have a new contact from LinkedIn South American. There's an active community there I recently discovered on plain English, and they were drafting some simple lease agreements that have visuals as a part of them that I discovered recently. So that's how I learned about it. One of my South African colleagues of all places said, hey.
Really? Yeah. Well, I did do a little poking around and saw that in Minnesota, there's also a plain English. Well, at least there's an executive order that Governor Dayton signed in 2014. So, as with so much legal research, you find information at the federal level, then it's often interesting to see what kind of corollary we have at a state level.
I'll be sure to drop that research. Oh no, you've given it to me, I believe.
Yeah, I sent you the executive order number, I think, yesterday. So we can drop that in.
Spend just a second here before we shift over to font usage.
Yes, which seems kind of related. It's all about, can you read and understand what you're looking at? There are some fonts that are almost unintelligible. Yeah, so I just had Googled Minnesota plain English, and I saw that Governor Dayton had issued an executive order, which reminded me of this lovely compilation of Minnesota executive orders from 1967 to the present.
Oh, that's nice.
If you look at Tim Walz, to no surprise, he has way more executive orders than I think anybody else, because during the pandemic,
COVID related,
it was one EO after another. But that's where you can find the plain English one. I had the number, so I just typed in the number. But I suppose the title and description, you could just search. I think plain English was in the title. Let's see.
Give it a try. We'll do this on the fly. We're all plain English. Plain.
Yeah. The old trick. Plain language.
The executive.
So click on the file, Mike.
PDF for the let's take a look.
I was going to open. Yeah. So typical, implementing plain language. I guess this was just in the executive branch, but I love the last line of the order on plain language. In testimony whereof I have set my hand. Yeah, that's not so plain, but it is convention. So
what I don't know is if there's and I don't know why you wouldn't just adopt the federal resource, because these are general principles untied to any jurisdictional concern, right? I mean,
right.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah. Always got to have the formal, and I've talked to clients. I've had clients tell me that they don't want one of the readability issues is, and Ken Adams writes about this quite a bit. When you express a numerical value, both in number form and in written form, which is just a way of creating unintentional ambiguity in your document, missing zeros or just the wrong number and they don't match.
Yeah. And, I think the initial kind of impulse is to put them both down to make sure that, like, if you spelled the number incorrectly, the number would say what the real number was, or if you missed a digit on the number, that spelling it out would tell you what it was. But the problem is, if they don't match, it introduces confusion. So it doesn't solve the problem it's trying to solve. All it can do is potentially create the problem that it's trying to solve. I'm with Ken Adams on it. You choose one or the other and double check it.
I did have a client say, no, put it back in. I took it out of a contract once and no, we want the formal.
Right.
And I said, it's not really great drafting policy, but I understand.
Yeah.
It's a risk. We'll just be very careful when we do it. But
right.
The uniform conveyancing blanks, we did a project developing automations for the uniform conveyancing blank, and it turns out that that they use that format, the two number format, and so we started looking around for a way of automatically translating that in the automation. and we reached out to the company and the group of users who used that service. It was called Afterpattern at the time, and everyone was like, "No, that's terrible drafting practice. We're not gonna build that." So my developer, my colleague here, who shares an office with me, he's like, "Well, we're gonna have to do it manually." So he wrote the script in Python, and so just all this extra work to.
Oh yeah, all this extra work to potentially introduce confusion.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, well, and that was Ken Adams' point as well, is that it's just not readable, right? It just hinders the readability of the document anyway. So
I don't know. I mean, I suppose to some degree, if you want to hinder readability, that's the point where you want someone to stop and double check and pay attention. Here's the number. That's
there you go.
An important part of this. So
what did we
stumble on it?
The other question I had this week had to do with searches related to fonts, and so quick transition here as we come to the bottom half of the hour. The question had not so much to do with the protectability of fonts in terms of copyright or trademark, but when you're doing a clearance search for a trademark, how do you search for fonts? Right? Because you don't want it to be confusingly similar with another mark. If it is, it won't be registerable. So how do you search for fonts? By name, what might it be? There's a whole extra show we could do about the protectability of fonts and typefaces. And, I got into this a little bit. I'm like, well, a font and a typeface are not the same thing. Turns out that at the Copyright Office, you can copyright a font because that's the underlying software which generates a typeface, which is not, according to the office, copyrightable. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a functional thing. So, whereas the font can be expressed in any number of software, any number of ways in software. So I jump. Have you ever used Butterick?
I have not, except as a sewing pattern. I think it's a different Butterick.
Butterick is Practical Typography, writes a book called Typography for Lawyers, which is just really great. A lot of the plain English stuff that we talked about is in here, at least in terms of the visual formatting. There's also a kind of an introduction to what is a font, and jumps into things like kerning and all that kind of stuff. Very, very, very cool. And interestingly, Butterick had some tips for identifying fonts. Things like taking a look at you can view the page source. You can look at if you're on the website, you can look at the page source and look at the font family and the CSS code. Introduced me to this kind of cool tool called What Font, just a plugin. And then you can see that as I hover over the font, it gives me the font name. And then in this case, it's Valkyrie Text, which is the proprietary font that you purchase from Butterick. If I click on it,
it looks very much like Times New Roman. Just at first glance, I would have guessed Times New Roman. Yeah.
It was interesting. He says in all of his time, he can identify about 300 unique fonts visually, because he's got so much expertise with the document. So as you're looking at the page, you can identify the font just with this cool little add-in Chrome plugin. That was kind of cool. And it even includes these proprietary fonts. I think it's just, again, looking at the underlying code of the page. So pretty cool feature. And then I did pull together a couple of searches for font related information in TESS, which is where we do I did that as a free form search, and I did a couple, and I'm gonna have to grab my notes here to paste these in because I didn't want to have to type these out manually each time. Have you ever done a search on TESS? Do you do any of that kind of clearance work?
We rarely are asked for this kind of thing. The IP firms usually have their own folks doing those in-house.
And there are other subscription description tools as well. Just
Right.
Tess is free, and the challenging thing with Tess is you've got all of these really cool fielded searches, so you can get
Right.
really sophisticated with your query. But the Boolean sort of changes from not the Boolean, but the search logic and how you need to search differs from each field, from field to field.
Oh gosh.
So you have to be
Okay.
careful, but there's very really helpful. If I click on any one of these, it takes me to a description of the field and how to search it. So it's kind of cool. And I brought a search here where I'm searching for the term serif. So just a serif font. It's interesting. You have to do something like that. You have to understand the typographical term in order to do this search. I did get results in here. I'm searching DE, which is the description of the mark. And you can see it's just the term followed by a bracketed initial for the field type.
Yeah.
Very, very straightforward. Got my brackets here. But okay, that's because I left this open since yesterday.
Oh yeah. Yeah, when I was doing a little research on, I think it's in tests where when you're searching, there are these ways to indicate if the letter is also an illustration, like the letter K can look like a person. And
Yeah.
so, what are you trying to get at? And there are all these ways in marks and logos that letters take on different shapes besides just being a font name.
Yeah, there are these cool design codes for if you're looking for animals, specifically elephants, that's associated. There's a whole taxonomy of codes related to creatures. You can use those numbers as your search terms.
Wild. So if you pull up one of those word marks, then do you see it? Yeah, that's it.
So what it's just saying here, and you saw that I excluded sans serif fonts.
Right.
You have to do that because sans and serif are two separate words. But eliminate those. But you notice it just says letters in a modern serif.
Yep. And so then it shows you that mark.
You can do a search for like Times New Roman. You'll see that sometimes.
Sure.
Here it is. There it is. It says that the mark is using Times New Roman.
I'm kind of surprised there's only 475 for a search for Times New Roman. I mean, I suppose other folks are using the mark, but not registering it, or using that font, but not.
Yeah, and we had over 4,000 results for a serif font. I guess that kind of makes sense because
right.
You don't want to limit the scope of your mark, right? If it's only Times New Roman,
right.
Is another serif font also confusingly similar?
Confusingly, yeah, that's right.
Here's the mark for Times New Roman, which is owned by, I always forget the name of the owner here.
Who is it? Monotype Corporation Limited.
Monotype, yeah.
I always think it should be the New York Times.
The classification code is 009. So, and again, this is for typefaces, type fonts.
Yeah.
I did do a search.
I mean, often, Mike, we get like deep into these, like, I feel the same way with patent searches and trademark searches, where you're trying to, see the entire landscape to make sure you're not going to be duplicative of something that exists. And I get a certain distance into it and think that's when you have to hire a specialist.
Yeah.
Or hire someone to do it. I've tried to teach lay people how to do patent searching, and honestly, it gets more and more difficult every year, right? There's more and more patents to search through.
Yeah, you really need to
used to do it on their own, but I don't know anymore.
You really need to know the technology, right? Yeah. Otherwise, you're not going to know the terms to search.
Right.
And there's just that is I'm sure the AI is getting much, much, much better. And even if you use something like Google to do your patent searching, it does a really good job of adding in automatically all of those additional search terms for
Sure.
you.
Yeah.
But still, you want to know what you're reading, right? And you want to be one of those scary people with 12 degrees in,
Right.
but this query here was just looking for typeface trademark fonts, where I'm looking for the class code.
Yep.
I'll share this in. The Boolean in TESS is with is the same sentence and same is the same paragraph.
Oh gosh, yep.
So and messed around a little bit with those and ended up having to use with and same. This is a little over broad for what we might want for this kind of search, but it was the narrowest I could get it. But I welcome comments, and we are at the bottom of the hour. I need to jump to my next meeting.
Yeah.
I hate to say it. Karen, thank you so much for.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone, and let us know what kind of trademark searching you're figuring out.
Have a great weekend.